Understanding the migrant. There is a difference between the average migrant and whites. The migrant is compelled to seek out a better place to live. But we find whites relatively settled. The peopling of North America was an exception driven by opportunity. There is a reason why this flood of Europeans has slowed that further illustrates the differences in the two groups. The migrations of 2020 and on is not akin to the migrations of British citizens and others in the 1500 and up until recent times. These are two different peoples with two vastly different cultures and motives. Naturally, there will be considerable effort made by my detractors to demonstrate there are exceptions, meaning there are similarities between the two movements, and indeed there are valid comparisons. But the distinction between them is the crucial fact. The issue that is explored here and the difference between the two groups is not due to skin color, it is tied to skin color by half stance. There is a correlation but not causation. However, white people attain to their position as cultural influences, because of attributes that, while not caused by white skin, are associated with white peoples. Whereas the people engaged in this recent migration but not white, are associated with a different set of behaviors. There is a real cultural divide. There are two motivations for our actions. There are two disparate reasons why people do things. These motivations are so distinct and so influential, they generate two separate systems. Most people raised on the thinking that led to the present disaster, prefer to associate life choices with the kind of decisions we make grocery shopping. Being a migrant in the present manifestation, is not just a choice similar to other choices a person might make. These differences between the two classes of migrants, as related to migration, are indicators of two distinct races that inhabit two incompatible realities. Most people do not understand the issues because they do not place the groups in context. This migration is not about a different group of persons with different skin tones invading the lands of another group. Despite the association with different physical races, the migration concerns two human populations that constitute two human species that are not actually tied to race. Physically, the two races can interbreed. Physically, they are interfertile and can raise children, but they are culturally incompatible. They are not attracted to one another, in fact, they repel each other. The one group should not be associated with the other, especially as part of the same family. However, we have to understand how to identify these groups and the differences between them to understand the fracture between them. This is not a division that the members of these groups can cross. The first group in stand is the group most people associate with human beings. This first group are called Homo sapiens sapiens. People view this group as composed of intelligent animals. This animal has developed language and exhibits advanced social skills. In short, Homo sapiens sapiens is the creature most of us associate with ourselves. It ought not be hard to understand this group. But that is the problem. Since they are so familiar, we do not stop to consider if we know what we are talking about. The biggest problem is that we think Group 1 encompasses all humans and all possible humans. This is not so. Group 1 humans, GOH, are products of an evolutionary process. Go originated from animals but are still considered animals. Go are smart animals but animals, nevertheless. Thus, Go are fully describable in physical terms. Everything a Go is associated with a physical factor. This is why they are called, in the Bible at least, the people of the flesh. But we are not all of the flesh. Not all of us subscribe to this kind of thinking. However, Go do not consider the reticence of some to be significant. In their minds all persons evolved, all humans are composed of flesh, and we are all animals. This would mean Go is all-encompassing and there is no person that exists outside of the parameters defined by the Go category. Group 1 humans are able to promote reconciliation and tolerance, except they cannot compromise on the fundamentals of their position, nor tolerate anyone that does not recognize the physical nature of human beings. Every negotiation with Go then results in a compromise in our position. It is not that Go do not negotiate, it is that they will agree to anything other than what Christians adhere to. Those who live in the spirit are regionalists or Group 2 persons, GTP. Those in the flesh, the GOP, are federalists. These terms, federalist and regionalist, relate to the group's way of administrating their societies or social groups. Federalists see reality as all one substance and power is the prevailing element. If something happens, it is because an application of power makes it happen. This is also called the principle of causality. But the manipulation of power is not what typifies migrants. Reliance on power to effect a change is a given. But this is often one stage removed, in that migrants rely on the power of the state and NGO to advance their cause. To put this another way, whites are considered to represent another race, compared to the migrants. Not because of their skin color, but because Britain, an historically white nation, came closest of all nations to the federalist system. But federalism is the system in which all nations and peoples remain trapped. Other Western nations, for the most part, emulated Britain to some degree, and because of her power, she passed on a good slice of her values to a large number of major economies. We could embark on a never-ending discussion as to how Britain differed from other countries, especially those of the East, but it would not lead us to where we need to go. The difference between Britain and other nations, even the Western one, is not absolute, but the differences are tied to the Bible and encapsulated in the distinction between federalism and regionalism. The concept of two races and the divide between the old and new migrations cannot be understood until we understand how federalists and regionalists think about reality. Federalism is based on power. Power is considered natural. Primitive federalists always attempt to tap into this natural power. Modern federalists create pyramids, some real and some conceptual, to transfer power from the earth to the crown. Power in the West is supplied to the center by administrative hierarchies. But power does not emerge out of a vacuum. People want power for a reason, and that reason is access to property. Property is the real source of power. Federalists create power gradients because it is people that serve to conduct the power inherent in property to the center where it becomes political power. The ability to intimidate is a prerequisite to robbing the base of the power that is rightfully theirs. To be blunt, despite the claims, Britain was never the violator of human rights the rest of the world was. Britain did not exploit its power in the way other peoples did. It is true, they had power and they used it, but power was not taken without a sense of duty towards the conquered. This novel way of seeing power became encapsulated in the phrase, the white man's burden. Britain only had the power it had because it was held in a responsible way. Now, obviously the correspondence is not absolute. Not everything Britain did would be considered moral or reasonable. We have said this already. The virtue that was Britain is one of comparison. Britain has the power it had because the rest of the world was so barbaric. Britain was never a biblical church, nor does it fulfill the conditions of a regionalist system. It is, in fact, was and still is, part of the federalist system. However, the argument is that it strained the federalist system towards regionalism. That is what gave it its edge. The importance of Britain is that it gives us an idea of what a regionalist system would look like. Israel gave us an idea of what a perfected federalism would look like. Britain and Israel epitomize the two ends of a spectrum that is still federalism. One embraced the perfect law and one the common law that put power most fully into the hands of the people. It may appear that migrants represent the power of the individual, but they ought to be considered a form of mob rule. Sharia and communism and fascism are federalist systems, and they permit parasitism. Entry into the West is a reward for compliance with the aims of the one world government. As the old empires permitted their soldiers to loot defeated peoples, as a reward for their service, the new empires permit migrants to loot white nations to demoralize, weaken and ultimately replace them. Naturally, this is considered a conspiracy theory. Who would admit to it, as a federalist? But federalism needs compliant subjects. Federalists value subjects who can take orders without thinking. Criminals are inherently federalist. They do not have an issue with the exercise of raw power. They may question who the holder of ultimate authority is. Once this is settled, criminals become good foot soldiers. For the most part, the needs of the one world government and its federalist agenda excludes whites because of their historic association with Scripture. Scripture is the source of what we call regionalism. Whites, at least when Christian, cannot comply with government edicts, at least when they require us to break trust with Christ. Our Christian heritage therefore poses an impediment to the long-term strategy of the elites, which is to establish a one-world government. Is it odd that the one-world government scenario is an objective consistent with Islam and the implementation of Sharia law? Law-based systems are all federalist, and all can be incorporated into a one-world government. Perhaps we are overwhelmed when we think about a reality in which there are two races and two branches of understanding. It may confuse us to hear talk of two distinct and irreconcilable ways to live. So, let's simplify the argument more. In the a priori and regionalist way of thinking, there are only two classes of choice. These two options are alternative pathways we can take as adults. The path we decide to follow determines if we have attained to maturity or not. As children we are dependents. As adults we begin to pay our own way. Only some persons, however, embrace this path to adulthood and others resent it and fight against it. Some people never get used to the idea of paying their own way. Nor do they learn to take responsibility for the costs of their existence. The first kind of person, the one who is willing to pay their costs, is a person who potentially could live in the Spirit. These people can be and often are saved. But that is a topic for other places. The other group, the ones who want to remain perpetual children, find ways to outsmart and outflank the adults. They want to remain at home even in the basement or forced to sleep on the couch. Even if they become ostensible Christians, they remain infants. They want a Jesus who is loving and non-judgmental, who saves everyone and punishes no one. The person who is a federalist is invariably a parasite. A person who is no longer a child yet remains a dependent, is a parasite. The new crop of migrants are parasites in the way the first group could not be, even had they wished to be. There was no one to sponge off, back in the 17th and 18th centuries. One did not leave Europe to come to the New World because they expected a free ride. It was, up until the last half of the last decade. Sink or swim and do not expect a lifeline. In short, we cannot understand the migrant of today, unless we understand that the governments of the West are engaged in furthering a one-world government. This is an organization that is inconsistent with Christianity, but which is consistent with the religion of migrants. These people are simply moving from areas in which the possibility of parasitic activity is low, to places where parasitism is actively encouraged.